the climate mitigation and adaptation. With regard to China, we are certainly very much encouraged by the Chinese leaders' declaration that China would reach carbon peaking by 2030 and carbon neutrality by 2060. For such a populous country with per capita fossil fuel consumptions way below that of the developed countries, I think it's a monumental effort to achieve that ambition. So we certainly wish China all the best, but Chinese government, in my view, can do it if it's determined to do it. We do not provide a lot of resources to China, very, very insignificant, because China, as the biggest shareholder, does not want to take too much money from this bank, as it made it very clear from the beginning. But as the president, I want to make some loans to China for the purpose of dealing with COVID-19, for the purpose of improving the quality of our assets. So when the quality of assets improves, we can afford to lend more to poor, low-income countries. So anyway, we're still doing things in China. But basically, our economics department is providing advisory services to China to help them and to find a very good approach to achieving the net zero by 2060. So our support is basically in the advisory area rather than in financing.
Great. I'm going to call up Callie Oburn, who's a former Scowcroft fellow here at Aspen, to ask her question. But while we call her up, just one clarifying question, President Jin. When you say 40% of financing of the AIIB is for climate change, you mean that's clean technology projects?
Basically, it's clean technology, but as I said, energy efficiency, or the project which can cut down on emissions are also counted towards this climate financing. But we are now working on the very important issue of Paris alignment. We are trying to work on this in collaboration with other MDBs like the World Bank, AIIB. And so we would try to achieve the Paris alignment by more or less this same timetable. But you see, you need to deal with climate change in a way which would be broad enough to help these countries. Of course, renewables financing is definitely climate change mitigation, but to reduce the emissions through energy efficiency, through mass transit system rather than driving individual cars, and all these are very much important. But we are working on the methodology and with other institutions to probably come up with a better, solution for the definition of the climate change mitigation.
Thank you very much. We have one last question from Callie Oburn, and then we'll wrap it up. Thank you. Callie.
Thank you so much, President Jin, for being here with us. I wanted to ask, in September of last year, you announced that the AIIB would not invest in coal-fired power plants, but you also announced that the AIIB would not invest in related infrastructure to coal-fired power plants. So I wanted to learn a little bit more about this. How will the AIIB go about actually pursuing this in terms of not investing in related infrastructure? And how was this announcement met with by the shareholders? Was it met with resistance or kind of with welcome? And how will the AIIB actually go about including this new policy in the AIIB's energy investment strategy?
Thank you. It's a very good question. Our energy strategy was formulated and approved by the board in 2017, and roughly 18 months after the bank was up and running. And in the energy strategy, there was a provision for coal firing power plants. So we did not rule out coal in this energy strategy, but setting a very tough conditions for coal projects. in reality, we never ever put any coal-firing projects in our pipeline. We never did it, in spite of this provision. The reason is many developing countries still at that time expected the MDBs to help them develop coal projects by very high standards, clean coal technology. But we were more prudent than what is stipulated in the energy strategy. And for instance, we turned down a project of a developing country. It's a project of power transmission. This power transmission would lead to a coal-firing power plant. That coal-firing power plant was built with clean technology, with Western countries' technology. We still turn it down because this transmission line would be linked to a coal-firing power plant. That's why I said we will not finance any coal project or any other project which is functionally related to coal. And that's what we did. So next year, we may review or upgrade the energy strategy. And my view is, this is what I announced. My view is in a new energy strategy, updated strategy, coal definitely would be out.
Thank you very much, Callie. Thank you very much, President Jin, for those remarks, especially so late at night for you in Beijing. And thank you, David, for your excellent moderating. I will now turn it back over to Nick Burns for our next session, which continues the conversation we had with SEC Chair Gary Gensler yesterday on cryptocurrencies. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to everybody who's online. We have a large group of participants from around the world with us. We appreciate that. I also want to welcome our global rising leaders of the Aspen Security Forum and the Aspen Strategy Group, 30 young professionals from all over the United States who are with us. I hope we're able to have them intervene to ask questions for this event. We're going to continue our discussion of cryptocurrency. A lot of you were with us, thousands of you were with us yesterday when the SEC Chairman, Gary Gensler, spoke on our platform. Our panel is called Two Sides of the Same Coin, the Promise and Peril of Cryptocurrency. When Gary Gensler was with us yesterday, he said that currently there are not sufficient robust investor protections for the digital speculative investment markets, comparing it to the Wild West. He went on to say that this market is rife with fraud, scams, and abuse in certain applications. And he said that cryptocurrency assets are being used in some cases for ransomware and dark web activities, adding that the paramount question for policymakers becomes, how do we rein that in? We have an outstanding panel to discuss this, beginning with Brad Garlinghouse, the CEO of Ripple, Sigal Mandelker, the former Undersecretary of the Treasury for Terrorism and Financial Intelligence, Stuart Levy, the CEO of DM Association. Stuart and I, good friends, worked together in the George W. Bush administration. And Paul Vigna is going to be back. He interviewed Gary Gensler yesterday. Paul, reporter of the Wall Street Journal, to conduct this conversation. I think this is one of the most important panels we have. It's one of the most important policy questions and regulatory questions for Washington and for the Congress as we go ahead. I'm looking forward to this discussion. And Paul, thanks so much for being with us, and please take it away.
Great. Thank you, Nick. Thanks for that introduction. Good morning, everyone. Glad to be back. Hopefully this session will be, look, I don't know if we could quite be as widely viewed as yesterday's session with the SEC chair, but let's see what we can do. I want to quickly, for everybody, just kind of set the table. It won't take too long. And then I'm going to open it up to our panelists. So I think the way to look at this right now with Bitcoin and these innovations of the blockchain is to think of this in terms of what you have at this point in time is a new way to create private money that is managed, issued, and maintained on a computer network. I'm not going to get into all the details of it. You can find those online. and spend a couple of days going down that rabbit hole on your own. But just think about the fact that what you have is a way to create private money on a computer network, and you can program into that money any of the qualities or details or features and functions of your currency system that you want it to have. If you want it to be a completely opaque private monetary system, you can have that. If you want to have complete transparency, you can have that. If you want to set a limit on how many units of your currency can be created, you can do that. If you want to have it unlimited, you can do that. So there has been, in the last 12 some odd years, just an explosion of activity around this new innovation. That's what it is. Think of it as programmable money, and it is sort of a new thing. Private money isn't new, but programmable money is new. You have now, we're at a point where you have thousands of these different cryptocurrencies circulating around. Some are acting as currencies, some are acting as assets, some are acting as tokens for other networks to do other things on them. So there's a lot of activity, a lot of different experimentation with it. The entire network, the monetary value of it right now, of all these tokens in circulation, about $1.6 trillion, very small compared to the larger capital markets. But this has gotten to the point where it has really caught the attention of lawmakers and regulators around the world. And that's kind of what we were talking about yesterday with the SEC chair, with Mr. Gensler. And that's what we're going to talk about more today, because now we're at the point where we are thinking to ourselves, what not only what can we do with these, but how do they fit into the wider world? And everyone here knows we live in a world that is changing at an extremely rapid rate these days. Every government has a national currency, and they use those national currencies to further their own national goals. Can these new programmable monies become part of that network? Are they a threat to that network? And what is the future going to look like? So that's what we're going to talk about. I want to bring in the rest of our panelists. And one thing I wanted to do, I was hoping Brad and Stuart could kind of do this, just briefly give us an update on, Brad, I want to call on you first, briefly give us an update on Ripple and XRP, where it stands. And I know a lot of people want to talk about the case that you have right now winding through the courts with the SEC over Ripple and XRP. So Brad, can you give us a quick update?
Sure. Thanks, Paul. Nice to see you. And thank you to the broader team for including me. I'm looking forward to this as well. Team Ripple, we've, despite the pandemic and frankly, despite the lawsuit from the SEC, 2021 has been a record year for us. Things continue to grow. For those of you who aren't familiar with Ripple, at the core, we are a technology company selling solutions for cross-border payment, cross-border settlement. In our technology stack, we use a digital asset called XRP. XRP is one of the leading cryptocurrencies out there. And as Paul introduced, the SEC filed suit last December, asserting that XRP is a security. The one thing I will say, I don't have too much to say about the case itself. I think yesterday we heard Chair Gensler comment that they brought 75 cases, enforcement actions against various digital assets. If you break that down, 37 of those didn't involve the sale of any digital asset at all. 37 were what we'd call ICOs, initial coin offerings, and oftentimes these were actual frauds. Only one of the 75 involves a digital asset outside of an ICO. And for obvious reasons, I'm not going to talk too much more about that case, other than saying it's definitely an outlier. And I'm sure we'll talk more about some of Gensler's comments during the conversation. So thank you.
Okay, and then Stuart, Diem is a project that was initially branded as Libra. It was started by Facebook. They brought in a lot of partners. This is a project that got a lot of lawmakers' attention, and there were hearings on it, and there was some acrimony about it, because I think just what was interesting about this one was the size and reach of Facebook, and the idea that Facebook could create a form of private money really kind of changed the narrative. So can you give us an update on where things stand with Diem?
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you for the opportunity, Paul, and thanks for inviting me. Essentially, you're referring to when Libra was first announced. It was, I think, a much more audacious project at that time than it is now. Where we are now is we have really revamped and redesigned the project. First of all, Facebook is a member of the Diem Association. It's one of 26 members. We've changed the design of this from being a multi-currency backed basket that was originally proposed to a single currency stable coins, which means that our proposal would be to issue in the first instance a dollar-backed stable coin, which is a lot less threatening to central bankers from a monetary policy perspective. But perhaps the most important for the discussion that we're going to have today is that we really took very seriously the question of the risks of cryptocurrency around illicit finance and redesigned the project to have a very robust anti-money laundering and other illicit finance design that we think will allow the world to get both the benefit of this technology, and I think there's a huge benefit to be gained from this technology, without sacrificing the integrity of the financial system. Because I think when I look at this dialogue that's going on out there, I think there's a little bit of talking past each other. People are either just talking about cryptocurrency and they talk about the risk of it and ransomware, et cetera. And then others are talking about this is an amazing technology and it's going to deliver all this value. I think both are right, and the dialogue really needs to take account of both sides of that. Our payment system, and Brad alludes to what Ripple's trying to do, but our payment system isn't working for a lot of people right now in terms of cross-border transactions in particular, especially for the poor, who for remittances, et cetera, it costs 6% or so to make remittances around the world, which is very, very damaging to those people. And it's not working even domestically in the United States, where the poor and minority communities are underserved. This technology offers a real potential to change that in a positive way, but it does bring risk from a national security perspective. It does have new challenges that we need to take account of. And you mentioned a couple of them, like ransomware, the imposition of sanctions. These are things I hope we'll talk about, because I think these are challenges that this new technology brings with it, and we need to implement it responsibly.
Okay, great. I don't think I'm on mute. I thought I was on mute for a second because I didn't want to, God forbid the dogs start barking. Realities of the Zoom world. So let's now bring in Sigal. I want to talk about, Stuart, you started to talk about the risks there. And I think, Sigal, what I hope you could do is sort of set for us the really larger table. I really think what people should take away from these panels that we've been doing here, to me, the most important idea is that the global monetary system is really going to change a lot over the next decade. Just the rise of nations in Asia that are becoming a bigger part of the global economy, technology which is changing, which is going to change how money is transferred and moved around the world, and the questions of how do you build these systems in the way that, in a way that brings the greatest benefit to the greatest number of people. So Sigal, can you kind of jump in and give us from your perspective what you think are the big issues?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Thank you. And thank you for inviting me. It's great to be back speaking, although I wish in person, but speaking at the Aspen Institute. Look, I think that when we think about these truly transformational technologies, we really need to talk about the major elephant in the room when it comes to our international financial system. I can tell you when I was and this really sort of became much clearer in my mind when I was at the Treasury Department. So when I was at Treasury, it was very much a global and diplomatic job, and I would travel all over the world And it was increasingly the case that particularly in the developing world and emerging markets, our US banks had pulled out, right? The US banking system, unfortunately, is failing so many of those countries, right? The big elephant in the room that we're not talking about nearly enough is that there are about 1.7 billion people today who are completely shut out of banking. And the question, the national security question for the United States is, are we going to be at the center of that? Are we going to reimagine what the international payment system can look like to bring all of those different people into the ecosystem? Or are we going to enforce our way out of that ecosystem? And I'll tell you why I say are we going to enforce our way out of that system? That's because I believe that the reason our banks have massively gotten out of the developing world and emerging markets is because in 2012, there were lots of decisions that were made to go after banks, U.S. banks, Western banks, with massive enforcement cases in connection with anti-money laundering and sanctions evasion. And the net output of that was two things. One, those banks started to spend a lot more time, effort, and money on sophisticated compliance programs, which is important. But they also then made the business decision to just pull out of the developing world and emerging markets. And when I say that, I'm talking about Africa. I'm talking about parts of the Western Hemisphere, parts of Latin America, and which is why people were begging me for help to get them access to U.S. correspondent banking. That is where an enforcement-only approach landed us. It landed us in this place where we have huge gaps around the world from a U.S. financial center perspective. Without a doubt, China is taking advantage of that. It's no accident that there are more Alipay users today than all of the major other global fintechs combined. And we have to make a decision, right? The US government really has to make a decision as to whether it wants to be at the center of what I believe we have potentially in crypto, which is transformational technology that can bring many, many more people into that financial ecosystem. And that, from my perspective, is the real national security issue, because if we shove these innovators who are like extraordinarily big brains, right? If we just push them out of the United States, I fear that 3 to 5 years from now, we're going to wake up in a fundamentally different place from a global financial infrastructure perspective. And the US is going to get, in many ways, in many parts of the world, we're really going to get left behind. And that's the threat here. We have to have a much bigger view of what our long-term objectives are and how we're going to achieve them. I could talk about this at length. From an illicit finance perspective, by the way, we have to have that technology in the United States. If we push it out, it's going to make it much more difficult to go after the bad actors.
Okay.
If I could offer, by the way, I think, to me, by the way, I agree with everything Sigal just said. The one thing I would add is the other elephant in the room, I think, is the lack of clarity that has gone on in this industry. And, for years, I think the crypto industry has asked for that clarity. And yet, we're still getting this kind of, hey, yesterday we heard it is clear, yet a few weeks ago, we had two commissioners and Pierce and Roisman saying, a letter, and I'll quote, they said a decided lack of clarity for market participants around the application of the securities laws to digital assets and their trading. So to me, one of the elephants in the room is we can't keep saying it is clear and then trying to make it clear through enforcement. You see other G20 markets like the UK, like Japan, like Switzerland, like Singapore, who have been proactive and engaged. And that has helped these markets thrive in those countries. If the US wants to be a leader in this space, then we need to provide that clarity and not act like there is clarity.
Yeah,
I agree with that, and I agree with what Sigal and Brad have said. I do think, though, that there's we don't necessarily have to jump to the saying that we don't want an enforcement-only regime. I agree with that, but when we say we want clarity, I think that the U.S. government has the ability to say, Here's the clarity, and set high standards. And set high standards around these issues. I think that, as Sigal said, this is a very innovative space. A lot of, as she puts it, big brains, no doubt. I won't count myself among them, but I know that there are lots of big brains in this space. If the United States sets high standards, the industry will be happy to meet them, right? And the clarity is what is desired. And in setting high standards, I don't think we need to choose between getting the innovation and getting the integrity of the system. We can have both. We can have this innovation and get the benefit of it and bring the unbanked in and make remittances affordable and have the integrity in the system. This technology allows us to do that. But I think that the United States, in order to do that, we still have the biggest voice in this globally. If the United States sets those high standards, the industry will react to them. They will provide it, and frankly, the world will come along. There are areas where I think we really need to set those high standards and insist on the integrity of the system throughout the world, which I think we have the ability to do.
Let's talk about one of those elephants in the Zoom. See what I did there?
That's good.
I thought of it and I thought it was clever. I couldn't help myself. I know it's not, but
Nicely done.
Thank you. Thanks for patronizing me. I know it's stupid. Anyhow, let's talk about China. China is in the early stages of launching a digital version of their currency, a digital renminbi. And it's interesting, we're at a place where the US Congress is talking about what bills to introduce, what bills to pass, how to get laws around this. Regulators are talking about, we're going to do this by enforcement. And the industry is saying, give us some clarity. And China has a digital currency that it is launching as we speak. So give me the compare and contrast between these two superpowers and their monetary
Yeah. So look, when you talk about China, you have to recognize, right, that they also have just extremely sophisticated engineers who are working on these problems around the clock. And in fact, China is, in my view, at the government level, is in some respects very far ahead of the United States. Look, they set up the People's Bank of China, the Central Bank of China set up in, I think it was in 2014. They set up a blockchain research institute, right? They have lots of engineers who understand what, with putting aside what they've said about crypto and mining, et cetera, they have really sophisticated engineers who understand the power of blockchain technology. In fact, in 2019, President Xi said that. He said, we have to be ahead of this game when it comes to blockchain. And they've even said that they would think about, or a former head of the digital yuan project said that he thought that they could integrate the digital yuan with Ethereum. What we have to think, but when China does this, they're going to do it in a very different way that's consistent with their values, right? They're much more of a surveillance state than we are. In my view, what we have to think about is how we can do what the United States always does best, right? Which is to incentivize our private sector to build out those solutions. And I think that we really have, there's so many of those that are underway in the United States. And we have to incentivize those projects, not deter them. If we don't incentivize them, then we're sort of losing what we do best, what we've always done best as a country, which is to unleash the incredible entrepreneurial spirit of the United States. Otherwise, we are, I believe this is the most urgent national security issue of our time. I believe that if we don't do that, if we stop being afraid of the technology and we embrace it, and then we think about how we can do those things that Stuart mentioned, right, which is go after illicit activity while bringing more people into the ecosystem, then I think we're going to fall perilously behind. That is my biggest fear. And again, I'm just a believer in the transformational nature of this technology because I now spend a lot of my time talking to these engineers, I mean, Brad is, one of a founder of a company like that. I just spend a lot of my time talking to these folks, and I think that they believe in, in financial freedom in a way that's extraordinarily exciting.
I'll just echo, look, I think it's very clear that China has been extremely strategic on this point. As Sigal already pointed out, they started years and years ago. The US is very late to this party, and the US's engagement, as we've heard, is not so far in supporting the United States. The Internet of Information, as we know it today, in part thrived because there was that regulatory clarity in the late 90s. And we're doing the opposite here. Here's a massive new industry that I believe without question will underpin the future of our financial systems, not just around payments where Ripple primarily works today, but more broadly than that. And if the US doesn't get ahead of this, if we don't have that clarity and that certainty, and again, I thought in my judgment, when you're dealing with an alcoholic who doesn't want to admit they have an alcohol problem, to say that we have certainty, we have clarity is like the alcoholic saying, I don't have a problem. Like, this is the elephant in the room. And I think, what you've heard from Sigal, I think very eloquently, if we don't address this, we're going to fall further behind. Look,
here's the problem, right? And I'm somebody who spent a lot of my career in the government, and now I'm on the other side. The problem is that I actually think there are terrific people in these agencies who want to provide clarity, right? The problem is that when you go into one of these offices, it's often the case that you then embark on an 18-month to 2-year process of trying to get clarity. And at the end of the day, you often don't get it at all. Look at CFIUS, right? With CFIUS, there's an obligation on the part of the United States to give an answer within 30 days. And then that time frame can be extended. If we truly want to incentivize this kind of innovation, and as already been said, people are dying for clarity. If we want to incentivize it, let's put a little bit of the burden on the government side, right, to actually provide those kinds of answers. Because the fact of the matter is, they're not out there. I do want to actually say that, when I was at Treasury, FinCEN was one of my agencies, and we tried to push out as much clarity as we can, and did that in the 2019 memo. But there's a lot more that can be done, and we have to hold our officials accountable for giving that kind of clarity. Again, from a national security perspective, I think it's a real imperative.
Let me ask you, from the perspective of the industry, and this is something I think is really interesting. Look, when Bitcoin began, it was one of the key words around it, and still to this day, was decentralized. The idea was that you could have a decentralized currency that is not under the control of any agency, any one group of people, any government, any banking cartel. And for its history, you have had this friction, and I think this is becoming a bigger and bigger issue. You have this friction between decentralized and centralized systems. How much appetite is there in the industry, really, to work with a government, or to work with the United States government? How much pushback is there going to be? And that leads to questions of privacy, which I want to get to next. But can this industry really work with an institution like the United States government?
So I think that the answer to that is definitely yes, and that there's a lot of the industry is filled with a lot of responsible people who do want to take effective action on these national security threats, and who are willing to work with the government. There's no doubt about it. Look, Paul, you're probably right. There's probably a certain element that ideologically would be against that, but the United States government has the power, first of all, to say we're going to set rules here, and the industry will react. This is a responsible industry. And willing to work hard on some of these questions. I think the government has been a little bit scared to sort of set that clarity and to start that dialogue. But I think the industry has a responsibility on its side, as I alluded to earlier, to sort of be cognizant of some of the things that make the government somewhat concerned here. I mean, you mentioned decentralized. The thing that this allows is it allows people to move money at in great quantities around the world instantly, without necessarily revealing their identity. There are ways around that, and that poses a risk on the illicit finance national securities front. But those are problems that can be solved, I believe, by setting clear rules and challenging the industry to live up to them. I agree with what Brad and Gala have said, that we've been kind of sitting back and waiting and hoping the problem will go away, while you see China rushing ahead and building another system which has features that I don't think that we want to live with in terms of surveillance and lack of privacy, but which is delivering, very low cost, very efficient payments to a lot of people. So, they are competing successfully with us if we don't step in and step up our game.
Yeah,
look, let me ask another question. If you had to put a timeline on how much time we have to get this right, and I think part of this is, especially for anyone who's in the United States watching this, you probably think you have a very modern payment system. But if you go to Europe or Asia, or India. I should say, when Europeans and Asians look at our payment system, they think we're driving, we've got horse-carried buggies. How much time do we have to really modernize our payment system, our financial system, before what's going on overseas just becomes the standard and we lose this?
We don't have any time. We're behind, in my view, right? It's not that we're not the dollar isn't the reserve currency and that we don't have a very sophisticated banking, but there are other countries from a tech perspective, I think, that, have the capacity to move well ahead of us. Paul, I just wanted to address one question that you said before, which is, will the industry work with the government? It's happening, right? There's a reason why the amount of illicit finance that actually happens in crypto has massively, massively gone down over the last few years. I mean, by some estimates, it's well below 1%. There's a reason why, when you have attacks like the Twitter hack or Colonial Pipeline, there's a reason why they were able to catch those guys and disrupt it. That's because there's a huge amount of effort from industry to work with the government to solve these problems, right? I'm an advisor to a company called Chainalysis, which is one of the premier blockchain analytic firm. They do incredible work both with the private sector and the public sector, driving illicit activity down. I think it's also a little bit of a misnomer. It's great clickbait to say that crypto is just about illicit activity. It's just not the truth. I mean,
right, we've come a long way from the days of Silk Road, and I think to discount the real use cases because of actions of a few, which again, some of this technology may have been born of an anti-government and anti-bank and all those kind of things. That's not where we are today. And Paul, to your question around where is the U.S. today in its financial infrastructure, one thing that I think this audience will find interesting is, since the SEC filed their lawsuits against Ripple, we have signed dozens of new contracts with banks, with payment providers around the world, and I think only one here in the United States. The lawsuit effectively has stymied the United States customers. Like, well, if the SEC is doing this and some of these are public companies, like, we're not going to touch this until there's resolution. That just puts us further behind.
I want to talk about, and you guys sort of started to allude to this, so I want to kind of bring this out now. One of the big elements with these networks, excuse me, when you think about it, is that they produce an incredible amount of data. And what happens to that data is going to be extremely important in the years to come. And I said at the top of this that you could think of this as programmable money, and you can. And you can program these monetary systems to do a lot with that data. Could be very good things, could be very bad things. How do you ensure that these systems don't end up becoming very dystopian, very invasive, and that, privacy, which has become almost an afterthought in our modern world, doesn't just get shredded by these systems?
Yeah.
Is it a surprise China is leaning in most aggressively, as they've all pointed out? Sorry, Stuart, go ahead.
Right, exactly. No, well, I was going to make the same point, Brad. Like, what's the worst outcome? the worst outcome is a payment system that catches on globally that is run by China, which clearly is not going to have the same privacy concerns that we do. It's much better for us to set these sorts of standards, to set sorts of rules around how privacy should be protected. The United States can do it, Europe can do it, the Western world can do it. To have that balance, I think we do have a basic social contract that I think has served us well in the financial system, which is that you have some expectation of some privacy in your financial transactions, but that the government, if it has a legitimate, sufficient basis to do so, can inquire and find out who the real transactor is. That sort of balance could be adapted to this technology as well. And that's where we want to land, I would think, as a society or as a set of Western societies. But if we don't start to create that quickly, the default could very easily be a system which has exactly those dystopian features that you mentioned, Paul. I really believe that.
Yeah. I think that, Paul, also is where you set out those, incredibly sophisticated computer coders and engineers. There are companies that we talk about that are really talking about how do you transform the technology in exactly the way that Stuart and was just discussing, where you embed privacy, but you also enable it to actually potentially go after illicit activity in a much more sophisticated way, while getting the balance that we've gotten wrong so far, which is to bring more people into that ecosystem.
And again, to get back to the centralization, decentralization friction, some people will answer that the only way to ensure privacy is to create a system that looks like Bitcoin. And look, understanding that there will be some people that will never believe what anybody from a incorporated company or from a government agency says. How can you assure people that their privacy will not be violated, given how many tech companies have been found of dipping into their users' data, given government overreach, which seems to be just they have a never-ending appetite for data? I mean, understanding that you can't satisfy everybody, but how can you assure people that you are responsible players that are going to protect your customers' privacy?
Yeah, look, I think we need to, I don't have a better answer than to say the type of, we need types of oversight and checks and balances and a free press that inquires on these things. We need to set rules and then expect people to live up to them. And when people don't live up to them, to hold them accountable. That sounds very basic, but that's the way I think our society operates, and I think we have to do our best in that framework to do that. If the only answer is I want to be absolutely guaranteed that nothing will ever go wrong, then you're going to have a difficulty designing a system, I think.
I think I'll just direct here. I think it's consistent with what Segal and Stuart just said. Is core frameworks like AML, KYC. Those don't have to go away in a world of crypto or blockchain enabled payment infrastructure. In fact, for Ripple, we only work with regulated endpoints. We only work with you can't have a Ripple enabled transaction that circumvents KYC or circumvents AML monitoring. And so I believe that the core framework around how we regulate our financial institutions globally, and again, if you're in Brazil and you have a capital flow control, well, that's enforced at the endpoint. The infrastructure pieces that can be massively more efficient in terms of speed and cost don't have to change how regulations are applied at endpoints.
Okay. So look, we have about 5 minutes left. I am going to try to get in some of these questions that I see popping up in the Q&A. How about the first one to Brad from Satish? With so much, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but just the basic. Yeah. With so much at stake, why isn't Ripple moving out of the US to the UK or Japan or Singapore?
Look, I mean, to some degree, the answer is we are, if you look at our hiring, we, are hiring more people outside the United States. We have a major presence in both Singapore and in London already. And as we continue to invest and prioritize hiring, we're hiring more outside the United States for these reasons. When we onboard a customer to, one of our core products that uses XRP is called on-demand liquidity. When we onboard a customer, we onboard them to a non-US company. But look, ultimately, being a company based here in the United States, I want to see the United States thrive in this area. I want to work with the US government to provide the clarity, to provide the certainty. But I again, as you've heard, trying to just provide that clarity through enforcement actions is not, I think, the right answer. So the answer to the question is should we fully give up on the United States? I'm not willing to go there yet.
Okay. But we're constantly perilously on the edge of, I'm not gonna talk for Ripple, of doing the wrong thing. I just want to add, even today there's a bill that's being debated on the Hill, which if it doesn't use the right language, could result in a lot of in the infrastructure bill, which could end up in a lot of core technologists being driven out of the United States. So this is an area where we got to act swiftly, but we also have to act very, very smartly. And if we continue to repeat some of the mistakes of the past, then whether it's Ripple or not, lots of companies are just going to be driven out of the United States, or alternatively, they're going to do everything they can to just avoid the United States because they don't know what to do here.
Okay. On that, this is a pretty good follow-up question actually from Helen. Which countries do the panelists think are leading this conversation and seem to be creating a potential model that could be followed globally?
I'll highlight 4 real quickly, maybe 5. Clearly the UK with their Token Taxonomy Act early on, while I think the US was kind of, hey, we're going to do through enforcement, they were proactive, engaged, and I think thoughtfully, how do we structure with Token Taxonomy Act? Japan, Singapore, Switzerland, even the UAE are, 5 countries I'd put leading the pack.
Okay. Anybody else want to?
Well, just don't forget that China is far ahead of us. They're going to do this in a fundamentally different way, okay? Yeah. Without a doubt, that's consistent with their values. But in terms of countries who understand the technology, we got to remember every time you have especially at Aspen, you have to remember that they understand it, and I think in a very sophisticated way, and they're developing all kinds of technology to further it. In the direction that they want it to go. If we want to be at the center of that, we have to have those centers about excellence in the United States, whether it's by really having people who really understand things like decentralized finance, what it does, what can it do, how can it promote freedom or prosperity, or all of the other different, wide variety of technologies that are super interesting and exciting and can operate consistent with things like investor protection, anti-money laundering, if you give them the tools to follow the right set of rules.
And by the way, Paul, these things are just. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Stuart. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that there are also international standards being set in these areas where, China is part of the conversation. Of course, and other countries are part of this conversation. Those are areas where traditionally the United States has had the most persuasive and influential voice. This is an area where the United States needs to lead there as well, and set those standards, because the outcomes that we want are going to be different from the outcomes that China wants.
Okay, and you know what? With that, we are just about out of time, and I don't want to go over. So I am going to turn it back over to our handlers at the Aspen Institute. I want to thank everyone for coming in this morning, for joining. At least it's the morning where I am. I hope it's the morning where you are. And everyone have a great day. Thank you.
Great.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you,
Paul.
And next time in person. Thank you.
Next time in person, yes, without a doubt.
Exactly. Thank you, Sigil. Thanks, Brad. Thanks, Stuart and Paul. We're most appreciative of this wonderful follow-on conversation from what the SEC Chair, Gary Gensler, talked about on our platform yesterday. And we're continuing now our morning this morning with a panel with a conversation between David Sanger and Ann Neuberger
With this, I'm going to turn it over to Anya Manuel, the Director of the Aspen Strategy Group, to introduce the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Neve, and welcome back, everyone. We're staying with technology, but moving from crypto to cyber.
And when we blow, ain't no told you so's. I'm a big ghost. I'm a big ghost. We hold the gold. I be super bullish like the bearable bull. My lifeboat full, ready for the big boom. Astronaut suit, headed for the moon. With my whole gang crew, had the 2020 vision, yeah we all knew. Now we pulling up in something brand new. New house on the avenue, beach house and cabin too. Normally I don't flex, but I had to go all out. You said it couldn't happen, now we floating through the clouds. You see us popping off, you be like, holy cow. I missed the showdown, ain't no getting in now. Shooting past the moon plow. Welcome all the kings and the queens to the new town. And we all loud, party last all year round. XRP hold us down, and we got the new crown. So you bow down. We hold the gold, and when we blow, ain't no told you so's. I'm a big ghost. I'm a big ghost. We renegade, we hold the change. The phoenix gonna reign, can't change our ways. To the end of days. To the end of days. Chillin' on a boat with a rum and coke. Or I be on an island, shining like a diamond. XRP got extras, cruising in a Tesla. I told you like professors, it's chess not checkers. You folded under pressure, but pressure make diamonds. Now you see me flying, and Bitcoin dying. You didn't hear the siren, we taking off, we skying. I bought more, I'm buying. I'm talking about that tiger, I'm talking about that lion. That XRP giant, you didn't buy, you crying. I'm sorry, no, I'm lying. Bags full, no denying. Bags full, no denying. We hold the gold, and when we blow, ain't no told you so's. I'm a big ghost. I'm a big ghost. We renegade, we hold the change. The phoenix gonna reign, can't change our ways. To the end of days. To the end of